This is something that happened a long time ago when I went to my local library. It was probably the year 2000. I remember that I was going there to get some educational books. The internet was around back then, but you couldn't quite just Google whatever you wanted to know like that. The more common method for me was to go to the library and check out books on the topic. So anyways, I drove down to the library, which was maybe 5 minutes from my house. I went inside, and it was a little bit later. I think they closed soon. I just know that I was about the only person inside. The library was somewhat large, and I made my way to the aisle of bookshelves of what I was looking for. Then I began trying to find the best books to check out. I spent a few minutes looking at books and comparing. During this time, after a while, I heard someone approaching. The library had been especially quiet. Everybody knows libraries are usually very quiet, but with hardly anybody here, it was to another level. The footsteps sounded like they were about to enter the aisle that I was in, so naturally I looked up, but when I did, I didn't see anybody at all. It was like they had stopped right before they reached the corner of my aisle. I thought that maybe it would be a librarian telling me that the library was closing soon or something, but no, nobody seemed to be there at all. I then went back to what I was doing. I was very focused on comparing the books because I wanted to get the best ones. Several more minutes went by. Then I remember casually looking up and glancing over to the end of the aisle. When I did, I suddenly noticed that there was a woman standing there. She was almost leaning around the corner and looking at me. This woman appeared to be a little bit younger, had blonde hair, but was wearing these strange-looking sunglasses, and she was looking right at me. I looked away because it was just really strange, and I focused my attention back down on the book that I was holding. But when I did, I realized just how strange this was. I also realized that this was likely the same person who I had heard approaching. But that was like 5 minutes ago now. Had she been standing there this whole time? I looked back up again from the book and glanced in her direction. She was still staring at me and hadn't moved. I kept looking at her, surprised by this and confused. I didn't know what to say or do. Finally, as I was looking at her, she suddenly moved back very quickly and went out of my sight. Then I walked over to the end of the bookshelf where she had been, and I looked out. I was wondering where she had gone, but I couldn't see her. She likely had went in another aisle. That little situation was very strange. I then hurried up and finished selecting books. I picked out 3 different books and then headed to check them out. When I did not notice seeing the woman at all. I then checked out my books, left the library, and went home. Now, I had these books for about 2 weeks, and then I had to return them to the library. I remember that night, I knew that I was going to be in the area, so I brought the books with me. The library had a drop box outside, sort of near the side of the building. You could just drop the books off there at any time of day. The library did not have to be open. So on the way home that night, at probably like 10 p.m., I stopped by the library. I parked in the empty parking lot and walked up to the drop box with the books. Now, to the right of the library building, kind of near the drop box, there was a little park area. It was just a few picnic tables and a little open space of grass. Beyond that was a bit of a wooded area. When I reached the drop box and put the books inside, I noticed something. There was a person on the edge of the woods. That seemed really weird. When I looked closer, I saw that this was a woman with strange sunglasses, the very same woman who had been staring at me in the library before. I was so creeped out that I instantly just turned around and ran back to my car. I drove home and didn't go back to that library again for months. I did return though, and never saw that woman again. I still don't know who she was or what she was doing. I'm a librarian. This is something that happened a few years ago at the library that I used to work at. This library was pretty close to my apartment, so close that occasionally I would walk to and from work. Now, it was about a 20-minute walk, so I only really did this when the weather was nice, or if I wanted extra exercise or just felt like it. The library that I worked in I would describe as pretty average sized. It was not that small, but also not too large. I really enjoyed it for the most part. Well, one night I was working until the time we closed at 7 p.m. I had walked to work that day, so I would be walking back as well. Things quieted down in the library significantly in the last hour that we were open. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, I was the only person there. I then went over and locked the doors, then went around the library making sure that everything was in order. After that, I was able to leave. I started walking home, which would be on several different sidewalks. Normally, when I would walk home after a closing shift, I would be the only person on the sidewalk for most of the way. It really wasn't that common of an area for people to walk, especially at night. But on this night, literally within the first minute, I heard somebody walking behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw a hooded man wearing a gray sweatshirt trailing me a ways back. Instantly, I was nervous. I didn't want to cause myself to panic or anything, and I told myself that it was fine. But as I kept walking, the man remained behind me. When I turned, he did as well. I remember at that point, I took a wrong turn intentionally. That went to a different road that was sort of out of my way. The man behind me did the same thing. Then, at the end of that block, I turned back and connected again with the road that we had been on. The man still did the same thing. At that point, it confirmed to me that he was following me intentionally. This made me really nervous. I also realized that I had not brought my pepper spray with me to work. Normally, when I walked to work, I did, but I forgot on this day, which was bad luck. So I kept walking back home, and the man remained the same distance back. Soon, though, I reached this McDonald's restaurant. Never in my life was I so happy to see one. They were open, and I walked inside. When I did, the man did not go in, but seemed to stop somewhere in the parking lot. After going in, I waited and texted my friend Allison. I told her of the situation and asked her to come and pick me up. She agreed, and luckily, she lived very close to me. So within 5 minutes, she had arrived. I quickly left the restaurant and went into her car. We drove away, and I did not notice the man when we left. But luckily, I made it back home safely. So after that, I didn't walk to work for a while. But that's not the last I saw of the man. This was probably almost a week later, and I was working another closing shift. I was behind the counter where I would usually work. From my view, I could see several bookshelves as well as some of the computers that we had. I remember at about 6:30 p.m. the library had become very quiet. I had only noticed a couple of people here and there, and some had left. But then I casually looked around, and I noticed that the same man who had followed me home was sitting at one of the computer desks. He looked up at me, and it really creeped me out. I tried my best not to look at him. When I glanced back over, though, he was gone. I was really glad to see that. Soon it was 7 o'clock. I just hoped that the man had actually left the library. I went over and locked the doors like usual. Then I would go around the library to make sure everything was in order. Now, I had already done the announcements, such as the library was closing in 10 minutes, and the library is now closed. Those announcements. So if anybody was here, they knew that they were supposed to be gone by now. I went around the library, going up and down each aisle of bookshelves. Everything was empty. But when I approached the back corner of the library, I heard a noise. I looked over and saw that the same man was still here, and he was entering the aisle that I was in. My heart instantly started racing. I told the man that we were closed. He didn't answer me or say anything, but kept approaching. I moved away and ran out of the aisle. I went to the next one over and heard the man coming after me. I then ran out of that aisle and quickly into another one, trying to confuse the man. I was able to stay ahead of him, and I was going from one aisle to another like it was a maze. I heard footsteps in the distance, but couldn't tell exactly where the man was. I then slowed down and tried to listen better. When I did, though, it seemed like he slowed down too. Very carefully, I moved out to another aisle. I needed to get to the front of the library where the doors were. I slowly moved over to the side wall and then went alongside of it. I heard the man starting to approach, though. I had to stop, and I went around a corner in this little nook area where a comfortable chair was for reading. I went behind the chair and hid. The man walked closer, but did not know exactly where I was, so he didn't go to the exact area, but got within maybe 30 feet. He passed by and moved a little farther down from where I was. Then I carefully and quietly moved out from my hiding place. I then walked back along the side wall until I could see the front doors. When I did, I just started sprinting for them. When I did this, it gave away my location. The man started running after me, but he was a long ways away. I made it to the doors and went outside. Then I got to my car. I quickly went inside and then watched the front doors, but the man did not leave. Then I called the police. I waited there in my car, and the police got there a short time later. They went inside and soon came out with the man. I was very grateful to have escaped. Looking back, I honestly don't know how I did it. I worked at that library for a few more months and then changed locations to where I currently work. When I was younger, I used to go to the library many times after school. This takes place when I was a freshman in high school. Back then, I did not have access to a computer with internet at home. So many times when I was walking home from school, I would stop at the library. There was one that was roughly halfway back home from school, and only a couple of blocks out of my way. Then I would do homework and also play games on the internet and go on Facebook and stuff. Most days, I would be there for a few hours, and then walk the rest of the way back home. I went there on average maybe 2 or 3 times a week, but sometimes more or less. So one day, I went to the library after school, and then logged on to one of the computers. The library was pretty large, so large that it had 2 levels. Usually, there would be quite a few people there, but they were pretty spread out. So I was on the computer, and I remember that I went onto Facebook. When I did, I saw that I had a new friend request. It was some random guy who I didn't know. The profile picture was of a car, and I didn't recognize the name. But back then, I would automatically accept every friend request that I got. I didn't even care if I knew the person. So I accepted it and thought nothing more about it. Well, probably just about a minute after I accepted it, the guy sent me a message saying hi. I responded back saying hi, and now I was wondering who he was. He responded saying that he was in the library with me right now. This seemed kind of strange to me. I was not aware of knowing anybody at the library. I had never seen one of my friends from school there. The guy said that he was on the other side of the library and upstairs. I didn't really know what to think of it, and I don't remember exactly what I said. But the guy kept talking to me on Facebook, and I remember he soon started to ask me personal questions, so I decided to stop responding to him, because he was kind of coming across as a creep. I went on another internet tab and ignored it, but I kept seeing more notifications pop up that he was sending me more messages. This was really starting to creep me out, so I closed everything, logged off the computer, and then left. I had no idea who it was in the library. I walked straight home, and I hoped that I wouldn't encounter that man anymore. So a couple of days later, I went back to the library again after school. Like most times, I found an open computer and then logged on. I went on Facebook to see several more messages from the guy. I didn't respond and just ignored them. He must have seen that I had logged on to Facebook. I know that it shows other friends that are currently online, so he started sending me more messages. I didn't bother to look, and I continued to ignore him. Several minutes later though, suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked, and it was some guy who I had never seen before. He was much older than me, had an uneven gray and brown beard, and was wearing a green hat. He then asked me why I wasn't responding to him. I was so surprised that I didn't say anything. The man then asked me to go with him. He said that he was leaving and motioned for me to get up. I said no to the man. He continued to stand there for about a minute before walking away. But the man only walked over towards the front of the library near the doors. I watched him sit down in a chair near the entrance and face me. I wanted to leave, but he was sitting right by the doors and I would have to walk past him. He was just kind of watching me, and I felt like if I left, he would follow me or something. I stayed at the computer for a while. Every time that I looked over into the direction of the doors, I saw that the man was still there and often looking at me. So then, I called my mom. Luckily, I had just recently gotten a cell phone. I told her about the situation and asked her to come and pick me up. She agreed. She had just gotten out of work, so it took her about 20 minutes to get there. But when she did, she walked into the library, and then we were both able to leave. When we got near the doors, the man kind of walked away. After leaving, my mom called the library and reported the whole thing. They were very quickly able to find out who the man was. The police even got involved. The man ended up getting banned from that library, so I was able to go back not too long after. I never saw him again, thankfully.